day after he passed, of course, I went to the gym because I need to put it somewhere. And when I was walking back from the gym, I heard just a clanging and something in my head just said, look up. And if that's not a testament to somebody's life, I don't know what is.
Welcome, everyone, to the Dad Central Show. This is Drew Solon, Director for Dad Central Ontario, and today I am on my own. My co-host is not going to make it, but we are looking forward to a great show because today on the show we have a fantastic guest who I know you're going to love hearing from. But before we get started, I want to remind you that the Dad Central Show is sponsored by Dove Men Plus Care. Dove Men Plus Care believes that care is the best of a man, because when men care for themselves and others, there is a positive impact. So, as I said, a great guest. Today, we are talking to Susan L. Combs, and she is the president of Combs & Company, a full-service insurance brokerage firm based in New York City. Susan started the company at 26 years old, 26, with a drive to do more better. This internal mantra has resulted in numerous successes and firsts, like being named the youngest national president in the over 85-year history of women in insurance and financial services, and the first female broker of the year winner for Benefits Pro. Susan is a Missouri girl in a New York world, and it's the lessons she learned during her Midwestern upbringing and 2+ decades in New York City that are the basis of her book, which is called Pancakes for Roger. The insights contained in these pages come from family, friends, colleagues, and life in general, but the most important teachings are from her late father. It was his steady guidance in life that set Susan's foundation, and it was his passing that inspired her new movement, Pancakes for Roger. So when Susan's not running her business or trying to help others through their own challenges, you can find her flipping tires. That's right, flipping tires at her beloved CrossFit gym, supporting the Missouri Tigers, Kansas City Chiefs, and the Royals, or slaying the dragons that have come her way. So, Susan, welcome to the Dad Central Show. We're so honored to have you.
Oh, thanks for having me, Drew. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, you know, the show that we do is obviously focused on helping fathers. We want to help them, be the best that they can be for their families and for the kids. And you've got an amazing story. But why don't you tell us a little bit more about how Pancakes for Roger even came to be?
So, Pancakes for Roger, to be honest, it was a simple request from my father when he was dying of Agent Orange-related throat cancer. My father and I were definitely two peas in a pod, the type A people in our family for sure. And we had kind of a schedule and a cadence. When he was on hospice for the cancer, I moved back to Missouri in my little town of 986 people in the northwest corner of the state, and to help care for him, because since I thought similar to him, not that my other family weren't great caretakers too, it was just I could appeal to the logic side because, again, we thought very similarly. So every day I'd get up and check on him, 5 a.m. If he was good, I'd go to the gym. I'd come back, I'd check on him again. If he was good, then I would go get ready for the day, and then I'd come downstairs and help him get ready for the day. But one particular morning when I came down from getting showered and ready for the day, I went to his hospital bed since we had hospice at home and he wasn't there. And so my parents' home is in a circle. And so I just kept going room to room until I found him in the kitchen. And he had a placemat and he had set the table. And I looked at him and I said, Dad, what are you doing? And he said, I want pancakes for breakfast. And the last year of my father's life, he was on oxygen and he was also on a feeding tube. And so for your listeners that have been caretakers that have dealt with somebody on oxygen, they know that if the levels can get low, there can be some confusion. And so I figured that's kind of what we were dealing with that morning. And I looked at him and I said, oh, Dad, there's nothing more in this world that I want to give you than pancakes for breakfast. But we're on hospice. We have a DNR. And if I give you pancakes and you choke, I think we're done here. And I don't think we're quite ready to be done. And of course, he said, oh, yes, I can. Matt said I could. And my brother Matt is a nurse, and he wasn't there that morning. So I knew we were dealing with some confusion. So I took his tube feeding formula over to the microwave because the general always wanted to heat it up for 14 seconds, never 13, never 15. He would know. And I set it on the table and he said, what's that? And I said, that's your syrup. And so his oxygen levels had kind of rallied around. He smiled and he understood what I was saying. And so a few short weeks later, my dad would pass away. And after we made the funeral arrangements, I came back to New York for a few days, and I took one day off of work because I just needed one day to just be and kind of shut out everything, stay off social media, stay off my phone. And my husband said to me, he said, "Why don't we go have some pancakes for your dad?" And so that's kind of what started the whole thing. And we went to a diner in Queens, New York, and my husband took a picture, and I shared the story about the request that my dad made. And I just said, "Hey, if you're so inclined, why don't you have some pancakes for Roger this week? And remember all the little things you have in your life, because we all have things to be grateful for." So it was just me sharing part of my heart, part of my sorrow. I didn't think it would go anywhere. I mean, it was just me talking. And then people started having pancakes and sending me pictures. And people started texting me saying, "I can't have pancakes now and not think about your dad and take a minute to be grateful for all of the service he provided to our country and also just all the blessings I have in my life." And so then we kind of came up with an idea. And my father's birthday was February 22nd. So we thought we'd turn it into a fundraising effort. So every February, for every pancake loving picture that we got on social media using the hashtag #PancakesForRoger, or now tagging our social media accounts, we would make a donation to a veterans clinic in his honor. Because my father, in addition to being a general, he was also a civilian judge. So the veterans clinic is actually run by the law school at the University of Missouri where he went. So it was just a way of taking some sorrow and doing some good with it. And again, it was just one request from my dad that I never thought would go anywhere. And then it then became a book, then became a keynote, and now is a nonprofit. So it's just kind of amazing that how one little request can have such a ripple throughout the world.
Hmm. Yeah, that is amazing. And just hearing how, you're choosing, well, one, your husband, saying, "Hey, let's go do this," remembering that moment that you had with him, and then you choosing to, share a little bit about it, and then people were gravitating towards that. So obviously, it's grown, it's significant for you, but now it's significant for so many others, and it's doing so much good. So what an amazing legacy. But I'm wondering if you'd be willing to tell us a little bit more about your dad and about why that was so meaningful for you.
Uh, I mean, mm, my dad was an amazing man. I mean, he was. And, one of the things I talk about in the book early on is I know I had an amazing father, and I recognize that not everybody had an amazing father. And
Mhm.
so I think the greatest compliment I got for my book is I have a dear friend that grew up in the foster care system in New York City. And she said she wanted to read my book because she wanted to know what a good dad could be like. And she wanted to get some of that good dad wisdom that she never got growing up. And so things like that just make me keep wanting to go on and go deeper. And my dad was just one of those guys that was good when nobody was watching. Prime
Mhm.
example of this is the day after he passed. Of course, I went to the gym because I need to put it somewhere. And when I was walking back from the gym, I heard just a clanging, and something in my head just said, "Look up." And I looked up, and my small town post office had put the flag at half mast for my father. And if that's not a
Mhm.
testament to somebody's life, I don't know what is. And just the outpouring of people, because again, my father was a civilian judge and he was a general. And the people from the military that reached out and had a story, the people that my dad had made them feel safe when they were little children going through custody battles decades ago, and said that my dad would sit on the
Mhm.
floor with them in his judge's chambers and showing pictures of us kids and saying, "I want to know what's going to be the best thing for you as a child." I mean, he was an advocate for so many, and he was a mentor to so many. And, by people reaching out still to this day and telling me stories about how my father impacted them, it makes me want to do those random acts of kindness. But also it teaches me that, you need to tell those people. So when somebody, I think
Mm.
sometimes people get uncomfortable when there's a death and they don't know what to say, especially if they haven't been through a significant loss. And sharing those stories are just so heartwarming to the person that's had the loss. So I always, if I have a funny story or a story that impacted me about somebody that passed, I always go to the person that lost them and share that story because I know it makes such an impact.
Mm. Yeah, it sounds like that's really really helped support you. After losing obviously somebody who's so influential, to have that type of those memories, those stories shared with you, that expands even more on the legacy of his impact. But I'm curious to know, did you always, I guess, know or feel that same way as you were growing up with your dad? Or were there times where there were things that, you look back now and say, man, that was so wise or so important what my dad did, but at the time, I kind of resisted against it?
I mean, since my thought process was so similar to my dad's, he and I always got it. And so my
Okay.
dad used to always tell a story that when he was doing a project in the garage, he would, and I would be helping him, he would go to ask me for a hammer and I'd be standing there with it. So I always kind of had my head in the game. So I was always pretty receptive to my dad's lessons. I'm not saying that my older brothers were, but and there's also things that I think maybe you look back and say like, oh, that was really a good lesson. But I think that a lot of the lessons, like some of the things that are in the book, like drive the car, or it's important for you to be understood, but it's more important for you not to be misunderstood. Those are things we were taught repeatedly that I think just became the fabric of who we were as people.
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah. And so, as you think about your father's legacy, and thinking about the impact he's had on you, and I know you've got the book, which is essentially his mentorship that anyone can get. What do you think he did that made the biggest difference for you growing up?
He saw me.
Hmm.
Uh, ugh. My I've always been a big personality. And my dad would tell you, if my dad were here, he would have told you he knew I was too fast for Missouri probably at age 5. And uh, um, my dad, he taught us that the world was bigger than our backyard. And
Hmm.
growing up in a town of 986 people, not all kids get that lesson. They think that's where it's got to be. And so he showed us the world and said, "Hey, the world's there for you to explore, but if you decide to come back to the backyard, there's no shame in that." So I think that really, I don't think I realized that we were raised a little bit differently until I think I was a senior in high school. So when I was a senior in high school in the United States, it's very common for us to take senior trips. And my class, I graduated high school with 15 people, and only one was my cousin. So, but when I graduated high school, we went on our senior trip, and there was 12 of us students that went, and then we had these chaperones, and half the class had never even been on an airplane. And my father, who was a helicopter pilot in Vietnam, later on, um, he had a love of flying, so we actually had an airplane growing up. And so that's when I think I realized that, oh, you know what, we were exposed to a lot more. And my mother was also a travel agent too, so it was kind of nice because my dad would have the work trips and we'd be in Germany because of work for him, but then my mom would help plan the fun stuff because she knew how to find the fun stuff from her vocation too.
Nice. Yeah, that's great to hear that. But I really love the phrase that you open with. He saw me.
Yeah.
And I think that, as we continue to think about how we can support fathers, being more positively involved in the lives of their kids, or just managing, the relationships with the people around them, that ability to, feel seen, heard, and valued. I think it's so important everywhere, but especially at home. Is there one thing in particular that he did that really conveyed that to you?
I mean, he never told me that there were limits. He was realistic with me. He was logical with me. I mean, for example, my dad went to law school, and there was a time where I thought, hey, I want to go to law school. I want to be a lawyer. But one of the things I struggled with as a kid was reading, and I was a slower reader. And my dad just said to me, he's just like, he said, I think it's something to explore. But he said, Suze, there's a lot of reading in law school. He said, that's about 80% of law school. And so then I was like, maybe not. So, but, I like that he just always kind of laid things out. But then also, too, I mean, I had a full ride in college. I was ROTC, for my first couple of years in school. And because I thought I was going to be an engineer. And when I decided that engineering wasn't going to be for me, and I changed over my major to a non-technical one, the Air Force was like, well, Miss Combs, we're not going to pay for that. And my dad didn't, like, even though he was Air Force general, it wasn't something that he wasn't disappointed. And I think I thought at the time he was going to be disappointed that I changed my mind or changed my trajectory. And at the end of the day, he just wanted me to be happy and excel at what I wanted to excel. So actually in my profession, even though I own insurance brokerage, the majority of my time now is spent expert witnessing. So I actually get to work in the litigation field, and that was a real pride for my dad. So the last few years of his life, I was able to speak to him about court cases I was working on, get advice from him on depositions and trials. And it was a way that I got to connect with him professionally that I'd never had before. And that was such a gift for the last few years of his life for me too.
Yeah, I would imagine, just thinking of myself as a father, and, I've got 5 kids, and,
Wow.
the things that my kids get excited about and that are similar to what I've been excited about, like my daughter in particular, like I enjoy real estate, and she's 11, she's now getting to like designing things, and I was like, I always wanted to be an architect, and it's so cool to see my daughter have an interest that I have. So from a father's perspective, when you see your children getting excited about things that excite you, it's so easy to build that connection. So it's harder when you got daughters who are different or sons who are different, but you still want to try and build that. So really cool to hear that it came full circle for you and you had that opportunity. So I'm wondering if we could talk a little bit about how his influence has really translated into your success, because I opened introducing you, and those are some pretty significant accolades that you've gained in your life. So can you talk a little bit about how that his influence has impacted in your ability to achieve the things you've achieved in your life?
My father always had drive, and he always had moxie. And, my dad, when you really look at it, he had 2 full-time careers, basically my entire life. But he was also a present father. And we also had a farm too. We still have a farm, but it's just, so
Wow.
he managed things, and he just did. And and I think with his influence, he was driven. I mean, my father was on national committees. He was on the Joint Chiefs of Staff for the Army and Air National Guard was his last position. He had been at the Pentagon, and then they moved his office over to Crystal City. My dad was a big deal. He's got a 4-page Wikipedia page, but he always remained true to his roots, and he always stayed humble. So I will tell you, when we had his retirement party from the military, we had a party in Washington, D.C., and we had one in Missouri. And the one in Missouri, I think, was such a cool thing as a child to witness, because he had all of his circles there. So he had his courthouse circles from the judgeship. He had his military friends there. He had his church board members and church friends there. And he had our family there. And so many of the people in King City, Missouri had no idea all the things that he had accomplished, because he just was he was accessible. And that's the thing that I just always appreciated, is that he always stayed grounded, and he never let the pomp and circumstance. I remember when I called him one time, and he was working, and he was in Brazil, and they had just had a parade in his honor. He was like, yeah, it was pretty cool. I'm like, in a parade in Brazil. I'm like, what? This is
Wow.
nuts. And, it's one of those things that it's just, he always remembered where he came from. And that's something that I think has been such a good example for me because, yeah, you're right. I look good on paper. I've gotten a lot of awards. I'm pretty visible out there in my industry and people know who I am. But I also remember that I'm a kid from King City, Missouri that graduated high school with 15 people and my dad always remembered that he was the son of dairy farmers. And I think that remembering those values and those roots are what keep your feet level on the ground, even though your head can be in the clouds sometimes.
Yeah, I think that's great wisdom. But I'm going to ask this question because it, to me, would be challenging, especially going into a place like New York City,
Mm.
given the perception, given the type of people that might be around, given you're caught up in the big city lights and the hoopla. How do you, let's say, maintain that in the face of, quite frankly, in this generation of this social media and all these things that are bombarding us? How do you maintain that grounding in the face of success, but also a world that really wants you to jump up and shout and, hey, look at me?
I will say I don't think there's anything wrong with saying, "Hey, look at me." I actually spoke at a university here in New York. I don't know, 10 years ago, and there had been a woman that shared. She was the CFO of a very large computer company that I'm not going to name, and I remember her saying, "Don't roar after the kill." And I got up on stage and I said, roar after the kill. If you don't roar for yourself, nobody else is going to roar for you. So I think there's a way to do it to highlight some of the accolades, but not be braggadocious about it. So,
Right.
and I will say, yes, there were press releases, things like that. When my dad would get, another award or get, another, like, a star for something or a military, certificate or award. But I don't know. I think New York works for me. I mean, it's worked for me for 23 years. And because I think that the opportunities for women in New York City are second to none. And so I absolutely believe that professionally, I advance so much greater in New York City than I would in any other market, based upon
Okay.
my personality and based upon how it is here. People don't care that you're a woman, they care that you can do the job. And so, but I will say that I've traveled throughout the country speaking, and I've found engaged in a much different way. I mean, where women are like treated like, hey, honey, what are you trying to sell me? Or they're so nice to you that they don't want to buy what you're selling, but they don't want to hurt your feelings. I mean, I went back to Kansas City for a job for 6 months and I experienced both of those things.
Mm.
So I do think that it really depends on the market. But again, I will say that even though I moved to New York City, I've stayed tethered in pretty well to Missouri. I went to the University of Missouri. I'm on two national boards for them. And so I'm back home at least 4 times a year. So I stay in touch with the community. I'm also on a board of an endowment fund in my hometown, that's about community betterment and things that my dad they would have asked my dad to be on this board if I wasn't around. And so I think that even though, yes, I've built my life, I've built my home in New York City, part of my heart will always be in Missouri. And I think I learned that from my dad, and it's just something that was part of my foundation. And I don't think that it was something that I intentionally sought out. It was just something that I emulated because I saw it so much growing up.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Thank you so much for sharing that. And to me, the power of that grounding and that example, when you stay true to those roots, no matter where you go or what you're doing, I think is really important. And I think that's what it sounds like. And it also sounds like there's an element of staying connected, though, through your involvement in the community. And so, going back or being involved or hearing what's going on is like that reconnection for you and keeping you, I'll say tethered or connected to those roots. So, okay, no, I really appreciate that. And yeah, I agree. So as a coach, I've worked with business students for over 10 years, and a big part of their challenge is being able to, speak clearly about their abilities or their impact, without, feeling like they're bragging as well. And so I say to them, if you're speaking factually and telling the truth, there's no bragging in that.
Yeah.
It's just the reality. It's true.
Just truth
Right? No one
telling.
can dispute that. Yeah, exactly. So I definitely appreciate that message too. Well, clearly you've been successful. Your father was highly successful and had a huge impact on you. But I mean, one of the challenges dads face is the ability to juggle multiple demands and feeling sometimes overwhelmed or stretched thin. And, so maybe a two-part question is: one, did you ever see your dad in that experience in terms of maybe feeling stretched too thin? Because he was obviously doing a lot, but you said how present he was. So the first part is, did you ever see that? And then two might be, how have you both learned from your dad, but also learned from your own experiences of how do you manage all the different demands that can pull you in different directions and still be present?
Ooh, I mean, that's a big question. I will tell you that when I was 10 years old and my brother Matt was 13 years old, he was diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia. And this was in 1989. And at that time, leukemia there wasn't a high success rate. My brother ultimately had to have a bone marrow transplant. He had a 16% chance of survival. And I remember when Matt was sick and they knew he had cancer, my dad, this was pre-internet. A lot of people don't understand that. So pre-internet, pre-social media, you couldn't put things out there saying, hey, we're doing a bone marrow transplant drive. You had to put things in a newspaper and hope people showed up. And, before my parents made a decision on where to have my brother treated, my dad made phone calls to all the doctors he knew, friends that he knew that were in the medical field, or friends that had cancer, and said, if this was your child, where would you take them? And so ultimately my parents landed on St. Jude Children's Research Hospital in Memphis, Tennessee. And so my brother is actually, since he's still alive, he's the longest surviving male bone marrow transplant performed at St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. And that was 33 years ago. And so that's pretty spectacular. But I think that was the first true experience that I remember going through as a child, where my parents just had to figure it out. And so my parents and my brother moved to Memphis, and they were basically there for 3 years. And I stayed back in Missouri. But my parents, after a few months of being with my brother full time, they worked out a rotation. And so where my dad would come be with me for a few days, and then he would go back, spend a couple of days there together to kind of get briefed on what the current protocol was for my brother. And then my mom would come back for a few days. And, my grandmother helped care for me. My aunt cared for me. My small town helped care for me. I mean, one of my mom's closest friends, I remember, came over on picture day and fixed my hair, and, that was the first time where I really remember my dad having to pivot his career, because he was also in the military. So he arranged to be able to work out of a base in Memphis, Tennessee, even though he wasn't stationed there. And, with his legal cases, he took them with him and he worked on him, when he was sitting by my brother's hospital bed, and he just made it work. And, so when, of course, there were times that, I felt like neglected and jealous because I was a 10-year-old kid. How could you not feel that way? But, you understand things more as you get older. And I know my parents would have done 100% the exact same thing for me if I would have been the sick kid. And, that was a really big, that was a hard time in our family's life. But it's where I really saw my parents be a team. And so my dad was home and things like that, because, my dad traveled quite a bit for work, of course, with the military. But, I remember him reading the funny papers to us on Saturday mornings. I remember him making pancakes and breakfast for us. He would, he made dinner as much as my mother made dinner. He was a hands-on dad. And so, I think that sometimes, and I'm sure you have a lot of dads that listen that travel a lot for work, and maybe they're feeling like, hey, my kid doesn't think I show up. I don't think it's about the quantity. I think it's about the quality. And so, and I will say this was pre-cell phones too. I mean, my dad had the bag phone and everything like that because he was military, but and he had the BlackBerry for the military, but my dad wasn't on those things all the time. And so I do think that being a parent now has to be a lot harder with all the technology, and the technology with the kids are on and parents are on, and I'm all for a no phone policy at the dinner table to have that engagement. But I think one of the other things that my parents both did is they took us with them. And what I mean by that is my dad had big friends, and there would be military dinners and things like that, and my brother Matt and I, we were expected to go and interact with the adults. So even when we were, I was 5 and Matt was 8, we were at fancy dinners and we were engaging in conversation with the adults. So it wasn't something where we were left at home with a babysitter. It wasn't something where we were given an iPad at the table. We were forced to communicate. And I think we're better for it, because I think it's a lesson that I actually appreciate more as an adult, because I think that it made me understand that people are people. You can be a general, you can be a dignitary, you could be a senator, and it doesn't matter. You're just a person at the end of the day. And so by having those experiences as an early child that we were expected to interact, I think it served me very well, in my adult life for sure.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Great stories. Great insight. And, it just reminds, anyone who's listening that every family goes through things, and every family has periods of time where it's going to be really hard. But what you do through that hard can make all the difference. You just described your parents working as a team. You described the hardship and what it was really like, but they found a way through it together. And I think that's a great message for any, dad who's listening, or any family who's listening. You are going to have hard times, but how you work together through those hard times can really be the foundation of how your family makes it through and comes out the other side in a better, healthier place. Not unscathed, right? Not unscathed, but able to pick up and move forward the best way possible. So it's a great story, a great message, and really loved how you described your father as a hands-on dad, even back then, and the fact that, he's involved, he's there, he's contributing and doing what he can to be as present as possible, even in the demands that he has on him, and still being able to deliver on all of them. I'm sure, I'd love to ask him what that period of time was like for him and how he made it through. But anyways, you've got, I would imagine, an amazing, story through the book that you've written, Pancakes for Roger, and it's distilling so many pieces of wisdom insight. Can you talk to us just about the book and maybe your goal for the book when you initially wrote it?
Sure. So, the book is separated into 4 sections: self-love, family, and career. And it's written in vignette style. So the shortest chapter I think is like a paragraph, and the longest one I think is probably 10 pages. And I mean, you've been hearing me talk. I'm not a fancy talker. There's not going to be a word that you have to Google and figure out the meaning. So it's pretty plain spoken, because it goes back to one of the lessons that my dad gave. It's important for you to be understood. It's more important for you not to be misunderstood. But I always tell people, like, hey, if you read it start to finish, take you 3.5 hours. But I get a lot of people that have said that they use it almost as a daily devotional in a way. Like they pick up and they read one chapter and they put it down. And I will say, like, the book wasn't supposed to be all about my dad. I had people after me to write a book for a while. When I publicly speak, on some of my talks, what I used to do is end with like unsolicited advice, and I would give quotes from people that have helped me along the way. And I always thought it would be cool to turn into a book. Like, hey, here's a plug and play, here's the quote, here's the backstory about the person, here's how I use his advice, and this is how you can. So that's how I thought the book was going to go. And then I started writing, and the general took the whole damn thing over. And so it's sprinkled with other mentors' wisdoms as well. But it was really a gift to myself of healing. And I think those of your listeners that have had a significant loss understand that. But I also think that in a family, when there's loss and you have somebody that's kind of like the, you know, the guidepost of the family that is no longer there, there has to be somebody that steps into that role. And since I thought so much like my dad, I was the one that stepped into a lot of the roles he had. So helping my mom out with, you know, with just handling the finances. I managed the 2 farms from here in New York, and just fixing all the problems everybody makes in my family. And, you know, so since I was thrown into that work mode, I will say that the first year my dad was gone, I dropped in 4 hours of what I called family office time into my calendar a week. 2 hours in the afternoon on Tuesday and 2 hours in the afternoon on Thursday. And my mother knew it, because I knew so many things were going to be coming at her way. I mean, because again, my dad was a general. He was also a judge. There was 7 bank accounts and 7 bank accounts and 8 properties. So there was a lot to manage, a lot to deal with, to the Department of Defense, with the VA, with everything. And so I knew that, hey, if I can designate this time, and she knew it, like I would literally call my mom and I'm like, okay, open the mail. Let's go through it. See what you got. So since I was thrown into so much work mode, I didn't get a lot of the grief time and the healing time. So the book, I will tell you, like I wrote every week, and it was very structured on that, as you can imagine. And I ugly cried every week. And just, you know, putting it down, and, you know, and telling stories and laughing and crying, and just really focusing on that healing for me. And so, you know, I tell people in the book, like, hey, I had an uncle. My Uncle Joe said to my mom when my brother Matt was born, he said, Gloria, everybody's going to give you advice. Take what you want, throw out the rest. And so that's basically what I say on the book. Like, not every lesson is going to resonate with you right now. If it does, great. If not, maybe you file it away, or maybe you have a friend that's dealing with the situation and it can help. But it's just, you know, it's just speaking from the heart. And just, I was also taught that if somebody gives you a good piece of advice, it is your duty to share it with somebody else, because if it helped you, it could probably help somebody else. So that's what I tried to do. I mean, this isn't a hey, look at Susan Combs type of book at any means. And when I wrote the book, my goals were very simple. I wanted to help 5 people, and I wanted to bring more recognition to the University of Missouri School of Law Veterans Clinic, because they provide free legal services for men and women and veterans and their families navigating the VA claims and appeals process, discharge upgrades, and just other general legal work. And I did that in week 1, because I had way more than 5 people reach out to me saying, oh, I felt like you wrote this book for me. I will tell you another great compliment I got. My friend Aaron Eckerberg, that actually, my father, when he was in the Marines, he was part of the Purple Foxes, and Aaron and I met at my father's funeral, and he was the Marine Corps representative, and he was also helicopter guy from the Purple Foxes. And he said, Susan, I use this book that I send to all of my veteran buddies that are having kids as a guide to raise strong kids. And so if that's not a huge compliment, I mean, because he was like, Susan, he said, the lessons your dad gave. And one thing I didn't realize is, he said, you know, Susan, a lot of these lessons are military lessons. And he said, your dad made it so that kids can understand. So he said, it's really cool as a military person reading this book. And he said, that's why I buy it for all my veteran friends. Cause I'm like, hey, you're going to pick up on a lot of these things. So I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that is more than pretty cool. That's again, a fantastic legacy of your father's amazing influence, and taking his experiences, his life, his feelings and thoughts, and influencing him through his family, and of course wherever else he was, and all the great things he did. So, Susan, this has been a fantastic conversation. I really appreciate all that you've shared. You've been willing to go into some of the maybe harder parts of that whole experience, but I hope that anyone who's listening can, one, hear your passion for, you know, the messages that you are conveying, and two, the power of a positively involved father and the impact that they can have on a person's life and many people's lives as a result. So it's been awesome. Thank you so much for being here. If people want to learn more about you or your organization and get the book, where can they do that?
Well, I'm pretty Googleable. So if you type in Susan L. Combs, you'll usually find me. But you can go to the pancakesroger.org website, and we have information. It gives a backstory about my dad, gives some information about his career, and it also tells people how they can get involved. Because now that we're a nonprofit, we're actually building an endowment to provide grants to veterans that want to do good in their backyards and beyond.
Well, that's fantastic. Once again, I just want to say thanks so much for being on the Dad Central Show, for sharing your father's story and your story, and just giving us an amazing amount of mentorship in the process. So thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Drew.
All right, everyone. Normally, Ed and I do a little bit of a wrap up where we summarize our key takeaway. And for me, the simple takeaway is this, is that finding a way to get it done, no matter what life is throwing at you, is one of the most important opportunities I think we have as fathers. Working together as a team with your partner or supporting your family is, from Susan's story and example, tremendously valuable. So if nothing else, that hopefully can be a great takeaway for you. So as always, I want to remind you that the Dad Central Show is sponsored by Dove Men Plus Care. Dove Men Plus Care believes that care is the best of a man, because when men care for themselves and others, there is a positive impact. And of all things, remember that you can access free resources and our Dad Mentor program at dadcentral.ca. So if you have any feedback, please email us at podcast@dadcentral.ca, and we'd love to hear guest suggestions or feedback on the show so that we can continue to add value for you. So as my co-host Ed likes to say, don't just manage your time, manage your energy, and remember to give yourself grace. We'll see you next time.